Australians thought that there was help on the way in this budget, but with a family with children and a mortgage, they are $25,000 worse off under this Labor government. Very few Australians can say that they are better off today than they were 12 months ago when Labor was elected. As I said in my budget and reply speech last year, we will support good policy and stand against bad policy. In the October budget, we supported several of the government's measures. We've also provided bipartisan support on the AUKUS security deal, and we've supported almost 70 pieces of legislation since Labor formed government. In this budget, we also support several measures, increasing bulk billing incentives, expanding the parenting payment, and the additional investment in women's safety and implementation of the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, which builds on the $3.5 billion the Coalition invested in women's safety initiatives. Mr Speaker, Australians give new governments the benefit of the doubt. But think of how hard Labor has made things after just 1 year. Australians around our country are grappling with mounting costs. Your mortgage repayments, gas and electricity bills, supermarket and petrol station receipts, and insurance premiums are the evidence. The number of businesses which have gone into insolvency has almost doubled in a year. And the problem is Labor's inflation. At 7%, it's well and truly above the 2 to 3% target range. International factors feed into inflation, like the war in Ukraine, but the main ingredient is the domestic factors. If domestic inflation wasn't a factor, Australia's inflation would be comparable across like economies, but it's not. At 6.6%, Australia's core inflation, the best measure of inflation, is higher than every G7 nation. Now, the government's taken decisions, and they've avoided others, which has made inflation higher than it needs to be. And it often happens when Labor is in power because they simply can't manage money. Labor recklessly spends, they carelessly cut, and they inadequately save. When you hear the government constantly blaming Putin's invasion for inflation, they're being deceptive. Australia's inflation woes are of Labor's own making. Inflation is coming from Canberra. And Labor's big spending budget will only fuel inflation and make life harder for millions of Australians. As soon as they were released from the budget lockup, economist after economist stepped up to the microphone. They warned that Australians were facing, under this big spending budget, a Reserve Bank that had an even harder job. Speaking on the Reserve Bank lifting interest rates, respected economist Chris Richardson said, "I'd thought that the Reserve Bank was done and dusted, but this has notably raised the chance that they will do another swing of the baseball bat." Now, government spending will increase by a staggering $185 billion over 5 years compared to our last budget. The Treasurer's cost of living relief, though, is only temporary. That temporary relief is targeted at Australians on welfare, but at the expense of the many, including Labor's working poor. It's a band-aid now, but much more pain later. And the government spending is only going to fuel the nation's inflation. This budget is a missed opportunity at economic structural reform and building a stronger economy.